The sound of my bag hitting the bottom of the stairs echoed like a gunshot through the suddenly silent room. Mark's words hung in the air, sharper than any slap could have been. "You've always been a burden." I stood frozen, 20 pairs of eyes, fixed on me, my cheeks burning with humiliation. 12 years of marriage reduced to this public execution of my dignity. That moment replays in my mind now as I sit in my car outside the house that, funny thing, was never his to begin with. The house he believes he owns, the foundation of his fragile masculine pride, has always been mine. Every brick, every shingle, every creaking floorboard, purchased with the money my grandmother left me 6 months before I met Mark. I was 38 then, established in my accounting career at Dawson & Miller. I'd saved diligently for years, but Grandma Eleanor's inheritance was the windfall that finally made homeownership possible. I'd just closed on the little craftsman on Maple Street when Mark came into my life. Charming, ambitious, and bursting with plans for his marketing startup. "I've been renting too long," he'd told me on our third date. "I'm ready to put down roots, build something solid." The irony of that statement wasn't lost on me as our relationship progressed. I loved him, yes, but something made me hesitate to mention the house was fully mine. Perhaps it was the way he talked about the man being the provider, or how he'd tensed when I mentioned my salary was higher than his projected first-year earnings. "It's a great starter home," I'd said instead when we moved in together after the wedding. "We can always upgrade when your business takes off." That was the first brick in the wall of silence I built, the first time I diminished my own achievement to protect his ego. He assumed we had a mortgage. I never corrected him. When the property tax bills came, I quietly paid them from my personal account. For a while, things were good. Mark worked long hours trying to get his business off the ground. I supported us, with my steady income, making partner at the firm by 42. Each promotion came with a twinge of guilt. I was outpacing him, and I could see how it chipped away at him. "Another late meeting?" he'd ask when I'd come home after closing a big client account. "Must be nice to have all that office support. Some of us are doing everything alone." The shift happened so gradually I barely noticed it. Mark began introducing me as the wife at business functions. He'd make jokes about how I helped with the books, when in reality, I was managing our entire financial life. When his friends asked about our beautiful home, he'd talk about the investment we made and taking the plunge into real estate. I remember the night we hosted his parents for dinner, 4 years into our marriage. His father had asked about refinancing rates. "We locked in at a great rate," Mark had said confidently. "I always tell Sarah, real estate is the only true investment." I'd busied myself in the kitchen, the words sticking in my throat. That night, after they left, I almost told him the truth. Instead, I added another brick to my wall of silence. By year 6, Mark's business was finally gaining traction. He'd secured several decent clients, enough to keep the lights on, but not enough for the lifestyle he portrayed to others. I suggested he hire a proper bookkeeper. "Why would I do that when I have you?" He'd laughed, kissing my forehead. "Come on, Sarah. Quit that stuffy firm and help me build our dream. We're a team, remember?" Against my better judgment, I left my partnership to work with him. That's when I noticed the discrepancies: client invoices that didn't match deposits, expense receipts for meals with people I'd never heard of. When I questioned him, his anger flared. "You think I'm cheating? Is that it? After everything I've done for us? This roof over our heads isn't enough proof of my commitment?" The roof that I had paid for. The commitment that existed only in his reimagined history. I started keeping separate accounts after that. I told myself it was prudent financial planning. In truth, it was self-preservation. I worked for his company but maintained my CPA license and took on private clients on the side. Money that Mark never knew about went into an account with only my name on it. We settled into a pattern. I managed the financial reality. He managed the perception. At neighborhood barbecues, dinner parties, family gatherings, Mark was the successful entrepreneur. I was the supportive wife who helped out at the office. The gap between truth and fiction widened with each passing year. Someday, he'd say, putting his arm around me at social functions. When we sell this place, we'll move somewhere warm. My gift to Sarah for all her support. A gift he could never give. A promise built on sand. I told myself the lie was harmless. That someday, when the time was right, I'd tell him the truth about the house. That maybe it didn't matter whose name was on the deed as long as we shared the home. I never imagined that my silence would become my only leverage when everything fell apart. I never imagined that Susan's 50th birthday dinner would be the night my marriage would shatter beyond repair. It had been a beautiful spring evening, the kind where golden light stretches shadows across manicured lawns, and the air carries the scent of fresh-cut grass and blooming dogwoods. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks earlier, an elegant cream card requesting our presence at the Harrington, the nicest restaurant in our small town of Oak Ridge. "Do we have to go?" Mark had asked, barely looking up from his laptop. "I've got that proposal for the Wilson account due." "Susan is your sister," I'd reminded him gently. "She only turns 50 once." He'd reluctantly agreed, but as the day approached, his mood darkened. A potential client had chosen a competitor. A long-standing account was reconsidering their marketing needs. The morning of the dinner, he'd emerged from his home office with bloodshot eyes and a day's worth of stubble. "You're not ready?" I'd asked, already dressed in my navy blue cocktail dress, a rare splurge from Nordstrom. "Give me 15 minutes, he'd muttered, heading for the shower. It took him 45, and we arrived at the Harrington 20 minutes late. Susan's husband David shot us a look as we slipped into our seats at the long table draped in white linen. Susan, gracious as always, simply smiled and continued her story about their recent trip to Charleston. "Glad you could join us," David whispered as he poured wine into our glasses. There was no mistaking the edge in his voice. Mark immediately downed his glass and reached for the bottle. I placed my hand gently on his arm, but he shrugged it off. By the time the appetizers arrived, he was on his third glass and talking too loudly about a guaranteed big client he was about to land. I recognized the exaggeration in his voice, the slight flush creeping up his neck. Mark always oversold. When he felt insecure. "The Anders Group is practically signed," he announced to the table of 14 guests, most of whom were Susan's colleagues from the hospital where she worked as a pediatric nurse. "Biggest account in the county." I focused on my salad, knowing there was no Anders Group, at least not one we were in talks with. Across the table, I caught Susan's best friend Melissa glancing at me with something like pity in her eyes. Had Susan told her about our situation? About Mark's struggling business? The thought made my stomach clench. "Sarah's been invaluable with the negotiations," Mark continued, his hand landing heavily on my shoulder. "My secret weapon." "Actually, I haven't been involved with client acquisition for months," I said quietly, trying to steer the conversation back to reality. "I've been focusing on our existing accounts." Mark's smile remained fixed, but his eyes hardened. Always so modest, my wife. As the main course arrived, tender filet mignon with roasted vegetables, I leaned over and whispered, "Maybe ease up on the wine, honey. It's Susan's night." "I know whose night it is," he snapped, just loud enough for David to look our way. "I don't need reminders." The tension at our end of the table was palpable. Susan's colleagues chatted among themselves, politely ignoring our whispered exchanges. I checked my watch, 9:15 p.m. My quarterly tax filing meeting with the Johnsons was scheduled for 7:30 the next morning. "I need to head home soon," I murmured to Mark as the dessert menus appeared. "Early client meeting tomorrow." "We just got here," he said, though we'd been there nearly 2 hours. "It's a 7:30 meeting. The Johnsons, remember?" Mark's face darkened. "The Johnsons, right. Your secret clients. They're not secret. I told you about them last week. Always so busy, aren't you? His voice had risen enough that Susan paused her conversation. Too important for family dinners. Mark, please, I said, feeling heat rise to my cheeks. We can talk about this at home. What's there to talk about? You've made your choice. He pushed back from the table abruptly, his chair screeching against the hardwood floor. The restaurant sounds dimmed as attention turned to our table. I should get my sister's gift from the car, I said, standing with forced calm, reaching for my purse and hoping to diffuse the situation. That's when it happened. Mark grabbed my bag from my hand, my soft leather tote, a Christmas gift from my parents years ago, and hurled it toward the restaurant's grand staircase that led down to the main entrance. Take your precious bag and go, he shouted. You've always been a burden anyway. All your meetings and clients. We all know what that means. The bag tumbled down the stairs, spilling its contents: wallet, phone, lipstick, a small photo of my parents that I always carried. Silence fell over the entire restaurant. 14 pairs of eyes at our table, plus dozens more from surrounding diners, all fixed on me. Susan half rose from her seat. Mark, that's enough. But he wasn't done. 12 years I've carried you, given you everything, and this is the thanks I get? The irony might have made me laugh if I hadn't been so humiliated. I walked down those stairs with as much dignity as I could muster, tears streaming silently down my face as I gathered my scattered belongings. No one followed me, not even Susan. Perhaps they were too shocked, or maybe they believed Mark's narrative, that I was somehow the villain in this marriage. As I pushed through the heavy doors into the cool evening air, I knew with absolute clarity that I would never return to the house on Maple Street, not as Mark's wife. The breaking point hadn't just been reached, it had shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. I spent that first night in the Holiday Inn off Interstate 40, staring at the popcorn ceiling as headlights from passing trucks swept across the room. My face felt stiff from dried tears, and my phone buzzed relentlessly with texts from Mark, alternating between apologies and accusations. I silenced it and watched the digital clock tick toward morning. 3:17 a.m., 4:29 a.m., 5:45 a.m. By 6:30, I showered, applied concealer to my puffy eyes, and put on the spare blouse I kept in my car for client emergencies. I called the Johnsons and rescheduled our meeting, citing a family emergency. The irony wasn't lost on me. My family was the emergency. Of course, Sarah, Mrs. Johnson had said. Family comes first. Those words followed me as I drove aimlessly through town, eventually parking at Riverside Park where Mark and I had once fed ducks on Sunday afternoons. Family comes first. For 12 years, I'd put our family, such as it was, first. Now, at 53, I had to learn what it meant to put myself first. I called my old boss, Richard, from a bench overlooking the river. Sarah Clark, he answered, warmly. To what do I owe this pleasure? I'm wondering if that consulting offer is still available, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. A pause. Everything okay? No, I admitted, but it will be. By noon, I had a consulting contract with my old firm and an appointment to view an apartment. By 3, I'd opened a new checking account at a different bank and transferred a portion of my savings. By 5, I'd signed a 6-month lease on a 1-bedroom apartment in the Riverview complex, paying the security deposit and first month's rent in cash. The apartment was half the size of my house, with beige walls and beige carpet, but it had large windows overlooking a small courtyard with a flowering magnolia tree. The previous tenant had left behind a faded armchair and a small dining table with 2 chairs. The property manager, a kind woman named Beth, had apologized for the sparse furnishings. It's perfect, I'd told her. And oddly, it was. A blank canvas. A fresh start. That first week passed in a blur of practicalities. I bought essentials: a mattress, sheets, towels, a few dishes. I set up my laptop on the dining table and began reconnecting with old clients. I changed my cell phone number. I hired a lawyer. The panic attacks started on day 8. The first one hit at the grocery store, standing in the cereal aisle. I'd reached for the granola Mark liked before remembering I didn't need to buy it anymore. Suddenly, I couldn't breathe. My heart pounded wildly, and black spots danced at the edges of my vision. A young stockboy found me gripping the shopping cart, gasping for air. "Ma'am, should I call someone?" His concerned face swam before me. "No," I managed to whisper. "Just need a minute." The attacks came frequently after that. In the shower, driving to appointments, waking from fitful sleep. My doctor prescribed anti-anxiety medication and recommended a therapist, Dr. Ellen Ramirez, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. What happened at the restaurant was the culmination, not the cause, she told me during our second session. We need to unpack the years that led to that moment. And unpack we did. I learned about gaslighting, financial abuse, and the slow erosion of self-worth. I learned how I'd enabled Mark's behavior by staying silent about the house, about money, about his lies. I learned that my need to keep peace had actually created a war zone. "You're rebuilding your foundation," Dr. Ramirez said. "Brick by brick. It takes time." Time was something I had plenty of. The sleepless nights stretched long, and I filled them by rearranging my small apartment, organizing client files, and finally, tentatively, reaching out to old friends. Coffee, with Diane, my former colleague, was my first social outing 3 weeks after leaving. "We've missed you," she said, sliding into the booth at Maple Street Cafe. "Richard says you're doing excellent work on the Henderson account. It feels good to be back in the game," I admitted. "And Mark? Susan's been asking about you." I stirred my coffee, watching the cream create tiny whirlpools. "I haven't spoken to him or his family. My lawyer advised against it until the divorce is finalized." Diane covered my hand with hers. "We're here for you. All of us." That all of us turned out to be true in unexpected ways. My neighbor in 3B, a retired librarian named Martha, invited me to join her community garden plot. "Nothing heals the soul like dirty hands," she'd said, presenting me with a pair of gardening gloves. She was right. The community garden became my sanctuary. Each morning before work, I'd spend 30 minutes weeding, watering, and watching our vegetables grow. Martha introduced me to the other gardeners, retired teachers, young couples, a widower named Frank who grew the juiciest tomatoes in the county. No one asked about my marital status. No one required explanations. They simply welcomed the new, hands that helped tend the shared earth. "You've got a natural touch with the peppers," Frank told me one morning, his weathered face creasing into a smile. It was the first genuine compliment I'd received in years that had nothing to do with being Mark's wife or being useful to someone else's success. Just me, being good at something small but real. As May turned to June, the panic attacks became less frequent. I developed a routine: mornings in the garden, days with clients, evenings on my small balcony with a book. I started sleeping through the night. I bought art for my walls. Not expensive pieces, just colorful prints that made me smile. I painted the beige bathroom a soft blue. Through it all, the house on Maple Street loomed in my mind. Not as a home, but as a symbol of both my biggest mistake and my possible salvation. Mark still lived there, still believed it was his. My lawyer advised me to wait before making any moves regarding the property. "Let's finalize the divorce first," she counseled. "Then we'll deal with the house." So I waited, growing stronger day by day, rediscovering who Sarah Clark was apart from Mark's wife. At 53, I was starting over, and despite the pain, despite the fear, I was beginning to believe it might actually be a gift. The first hint that Mark's carefully constructed world was crumbling came from an unexpected source. I was having lunch with Diane at a small bistro when she leaned across the table, her voice dropping to a whisper. I probably shouldn't tell you this, but the Henderson Group dropped Mark's agency last week. My brother works in their finance department. I stirred my soup, trying to appear less interested than I was. That was his biggest client. Apparently, there were some discrepancies in their marketing budget. Bills for services never rendered. Diane watched my face carefully. You didn't know? I shook my head. I stopped doing his books 3 months ago. Walking back to my apartment, I felt an odd mix of vindication and concern. The Hendersons had been with Mark for years. They'd trusted him. If he was billing them fraudulently, what else had he done? 2 days later, Frank from the garden handed me a section of the local business journal while we watered our tomatoes. Thought you might want to see this, he said gently. There, in a small corner article, was a notice that Clark Marketing Solutions was being investigated for accounting irregularities. No charges had been filed, but several clients had come forward with complaints. My last name in that headline felt like a brand, even though I'd had nothing to do with the business for months. That evening, my lawyer called. Sarah, I've received a petition from Mark's attorney. He's claiming partial ownership of the house based on contributions to the mortgage and property improvements. I nearly laughed. There is no mortgage. I bought that house outright before I met him. I know that, and you know that. But he's claiming you led him to believe there was a mortgage that he was contributing to. She paused. He's also claiming he paid for the kitchen renovation and back deck addition. He didn't. I used my personal savings for those. I have the receipts, the contractor agreements, everything. Good, we'll need those. But Sarah, this suggests he knows the house is in your name. He's been aware for some time. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Mark had known. All those years of pretending he was the provider, the homeowner, the successful businessman. He'd known it was a lie. And still, he'd thrown my bag down those stairs and called me a burden. The weeks that followed brought more revelations. Jenny, my former neighbor, called to tell me Mark had been seen arguing with a young woman outside a downtown bar. He looked awful, Sarah. Unshaven, shirt untucked. Not the Mark we knew. We never really knew him, I replied, surprising myself with the steady truth of it. Then came the call from David, Susan's husband. We hadn't spoken since that fateful birthday dinner. Sarah, I owe you an apology, he began awkwardly. For not stepping in that night, for not checking on you after. It's okay, David. It was a shock for everyone. No, it's not okay. And there's something you should know. He cleared his throat. Mark's been telling people you embezzled from the company, that you're the reason clients are leaving. My hand tightened on the phone. That's absurd. Everyone who knows you understands that. But he's drinking too much, making scenes. Last week he showed up at our house at midnight, demanding Susan tell him where you're living. What did she say? That she didn't know. She doesn't, right? No, one does except my lawyer. I hesitated. Is he in financial trouble? David's silence was answer enough. When he finally spoke, his voice was strained. He remortgaged the house, Sarah. Or tried to. The bank rejected his application when they realized it wasn't in his name. The pieces fell into place. Mark's desperate attempt to claim ownership, the accounting irregularities, the drinking. His world was collapsing, and he had nowhere to direct his rage except toward me. The next day, I received a certified letter from Mark's new attorney outlining his claim to the house in greater detail. He cited verbal agreements and implied consent, arguing that my silence constituted agreement to joint ownership. The letter included copies of checks he'd written for utilities and property taxes, payments I knew he'd made only occasionally, and only when business was good. I forwarded everything to my lawyer, who called within the hour. This is actually good for us, she said. He's acknowledging the house is legally yours while trying to claim he should have some ownership. It's a weak argument at best. What should I do? Nothing yet. Let me handle the legal side. But Sarah, have you decided what you want to do with the property long term? I hadn't. Not really. Part of me wanted to sell it out of spite, to remove Mark's false foundation in one swift move. Another part remembered the maple tree I'd planted in the backyard, the garden beds I'd built with my own hands, the window seat where I'd spent countless Sunday mornings reading. I need to think about it, I said finally. That night, I couldn't sleep. I scrolled through my phone until I found photos of the house from happier times. Summer barbecues, Christmas decorations, the dining room set I'd inherited from my parents. The home I'd created, that Mark had somehow claimed as his achievement. The next morning, I called a real estate agent. Just an assessment, I told her. I'm not ready to list it yet. Her evaluation came 3 days later. The housing market had surged in our area, and the improvements I'd made, the kitchen renovation, the back deck, the updated bathrooms, had significantly increased the property's value. The house worth $285,000 when I bought it was now valued at nearly $450,000. I sat on my apartment balcony that evening, watching the sunset gild the magnolia tree in the courtyard. The property assessment sat on the table beside a glass of wine. For the first time since leaving, I felt a sense of power returning. The house that had been both prison and protection now represented possibility, a future I could shape on my own terms. My phone rang, displaying a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. Sarah? It's Susan. Please don't hang up. Mark's sister, who had sat in frozen silence as he humiliated me, who hadn't called once in the 3 months since. What do you want, Susan? It's about Mark. He's not well. The business is failing. He's about to lose the house. He needs help. I took a slow sip of wine, letting the silence stretch between us. Susan, I'm not responsible for Mark anymore. I know, but... Her voice broke. Mom wants to talk to you. She's desperate. We all are. I don't think that's a good idea, Susan, I said, gripping my phone tighter. The divorce isn't final, and my lawyer advised against contact. Please, Susan's voice cracked. Mom's 74. This stress isn't good for her heart. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar pull of obligation. For so many years, I'd prioritized Mark's family's comfort over my own needs. Dr. Ramirez's words echoed in my mind. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for healing. I'll think about it, I said finally. That's all I can promise. Didn't have to think long. The very next Sunday morning, a soft knock at my apartment door jolted me from my coffee and crossword ritual. Through the peephole, I saw Mary Clark's silver gray hair and worried eyes. Mark's mother standing alone in my hallway with a small cloth bag clutched in her hands. For a moment, I considered not answering. Then I remembered the woman who had taught me to make her famous apple pie, who had welcomed me into her family with genuine warmth. I opened the door. Sarah, she said, her voice smaller than I remembered. I hope you don't mind. Susan told me where to find you. So much for my secret address. I stepped back, gesturing her inside. Would you like some coffee? She nodded, perching tentatively on my small sofa, eyes taking in my new life, the watercolor prints, the potted herbs on the windowsill, the absence of any photos from my previous life. It's nice, she said. Cozy. I handed her a mug and sat, in the armchair opposite, maintaining the distance I needed. How did you find me, Mary? Susan's husband. David works at the bank. He didn't want to tell her, but she... Mary looked down at her hands. I shouldn't have come without calling first. No, you shouldn't have. The words came out gentler than I intended. But you're here now. What do you want? Her eyes filled, with tears. It's Mark. The bank foreclosed on the house yesterday. He has nowhere to go. She reached into her cloth bag and pulled out a folded notice. The sheriff will remove him in 72 hours if he doesn't leave willingly. I took the paper, scanning its official language. Not a foreclosure, an eviction. The bank hadn't approved any mortgage because there wasn't one to approve. The house remained legally mine. I don't understand, Mary continued. Mark always said the house was his greatest investment. How could this happen? I set my coffee down, carefully. Mary, there's something you need to know. Mark never owned that house. I bought it before we met, with my inheritance from Grandma Eleanor. It's always been in my name alone. Her face registered shock, then confusion. But all these years, he talked about mortgage payments, equity. He was living a fiction, I said quietly, one I allowed by staying silent. Mary's hands trembled as she set down her mug. Then the business troubles, the client complaints. Also true, I confirmed. I left his company months before I left. The marriage. The accounting irregularities started after that. She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, I saw something I hadn't expected. Not anger at me, but a deep sadness. My son has been living a lie? Yes. And now he's penniless. Homeless. Her voice cracked. Sarah, I know you owe him nothing. What he did to you at Susan's dinner, we were all shocked. There's no excuse. But he's still my son. The old Sarah would have rushed to comfort her, to promise help despite the cost to herself. The new Sarah took a deep breath. I'm sorry you're caught in this, Mary. Truly. But Mark created this situation. I know. She straightened her shoulders. I'm not asking you to take him back or even to forgive him. Just give him some time to find a place. A few weeks, maybe. I thought about the house on Maple Street, the home I'd created with my own money, my own vision. The home Mark had claimed as his achievement for 12 years. I need to think about this, I said finally. I'll call you tomorrow. After Mary left, I called my lawyer, then the real estate agent. By evening, I'd made my decision. 3 days later, I sat across from Mark at a conference table in my lawyer's office, the first time I'd seen him since that night at Susan's birthday dinner. He looked haggard, the confident businessman replaced by a hollow-eyed stranger in rumpled clothes. Thank you for coming, my lawyer began formally. As you know, Mrs. Clark owns the property at 427 Maple Street outright. In light of recent events, she has decided to sell the property. Mark's attorney, a young man with an expensive tie and nervous eyes, leaned forward. My client contests. Your client has no legal claim, my lawyer interrupted. As we've established through documentation, Mrs. Clark purchased the property prior to the marriage with separate funds that were never commingled with marital assets. Mark stared at me, a mixture of anger and desperation in his eyes. You're really doing this? After 12 years? I met his gaze steadily. The house is being listed tomorrow. You have until the end of the month to vacate. And where am I supposed to go? His voice rose. That's not Mrs. Clark's concern, my lawyer replied, but it was my concern, in a way I couldn't quite shake. Not out of love for Mark, but out of respect for the person I was trying to become, someone who wouldn't use power to punish, even when punishment was deserved. The sale will likely take 60-90 days to complete, I said, speaking directly to Mark for the first time. I've authorized a partial advance from the proceeds, $20,000, to be given to you upon vacancy, to help you start over. His eyes widened in disbelief. Is this supposed to be generosity? You're taking everything. I'm taking what was always mine, I corrected him gently, and giving you more than you gave me when you threw my bag down those stairs. The house sold within 2 weeks for $475,000, more than the assessment, thanks to a bidding war. As promised, I arranged for Mark to receive enough to secure an apartment and maintain himself until he could rebuild. The remainder I divided. Half into a retirement account, a portion toward a modest new home in a quiet neighborhood across town, and $50,000 donated to a women's shelter that helped women escape financial abuse. On moving day at my new house, a sunlit bungalow with a wraparound porch and just enough garden space for tomatoes and herbs, Frank from the community garden arrived with homemade bread and a potted lavender plant. "New beginnings should smell sweet," he said, smiling. As we sat on my porch that evening, watching fireflies emerge in the summer twilight, I felt the weight of the past year easing. I had reclaimed not just my financial worth, but something far more valuable: my voice, my choices, my future. The house on Maple Street had never defined me. My silence had. Now, at 54, I was learning that the most valuable foundation wasn't built of wood and stone, but of truth, spoken clearly without fear or apology,